so it is the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
In your heart, you know he's right.
I hear there's rumors on the internets.
This is Liberty in Exile with your host, Yael Osofsky.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bring you liberty, not destroy it. The evil that governments do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones, so let it be with liberty in exile. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm your host, Yael Osofsky, broadcasting to you on the Liberty Radio Network and the No Agenda stream. Today is the 30th of August in the year 2013, and I am broadcasting to you from the city of Vienna, Austria. We have a good show lined up, and we're going to dive right into it here. We're going to have a special guest. He has been on this program many times before, so we look forward to his insight. Now we're going to head right into the show. On the line with me, I have Sir Chris Redfield. Sir Chris Redfield has been a guest on our program many times, and he is here to hawk his new website, the tokencapitalist.wordpress.com, and he's there to, I guess, split the proverbial shit with me. So welcome, Sir Redfield, to the program.
Thank you very much.
All right, you sound crystal clear. I guess we can begin. We have a little document here full of links, and the number one top news item as we see it is what is going on in Syria. Now, I have my own views on this, but I figured I'd yield the floor to you as this was your suggestion. So what lessons do you think can be offered from what is going on right now in Syria?
This is not going to be any comment on what's happening in Syria per se, more the periphery, right? So we have two countries. We have Great Britain and we have the U.S. And the U.S. has a clause in its constitution originally saying that Congress is vested with the power to declare war. And instead of that being the procedure for war declaration or attacking or bombing, President Obama simply issued a statement where he said that it may be happening on Thursday or Friday. And as opposed to what happened in Britain, where it went to Parliament and Parliament happened to vote it down, but it's just ironic that it was the U.S. that seceded from Britain because of too much centralized power in the monarch, but in Britain they're following what the American Constitution was meant to be.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't really know too much about the parliamentary system, which I think is a bad thing. And I've been doing a lot of my own research lately on parliamentary systems, mainly by watching the Danish show Borgen, 3 seasons straight, which actually isn't research, but it's a lot of fun. And we really get to learn is that these things are very, very shaky. As the U.S. Constitution designates, the president can be in power for 4 years. He makes a bunch of executive decisions. He, is able to do this and that. But when you're in a parliament, every single vote counts. And if you have a majority against you, your government could fall and new elections could be triggered. So that's something that I guess you could, as someone who is in favor of limited government, not wanting to centralize, you could be in favor of that. And the UK example that you bring up of them putting down a motion to try to put any sort of, any action or intervention in Syria kind of shows that the system worked in a way. And there are a lot of people who will go on television and talk about why this happened or that, but at the end of the day, that's what happened. And in the U.S., you have this stupid debate of not can the president do it, but when the president will do it.
Yeah, and I was just listening to the radio yesterday, and most of the debate and the questions were kind of about journalists asking for more information about the president's decision. Mr. President, can you explain your rationale? Mr. President, can you tell us why it was that you decided at this time? Blah blah blah. And it's
sickening.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate that it's not the case that we're debating whether this action should be taken, but more kind of, Daddy, why did you do this?
Yeah, and journalists are supposed to be there to reflect the laws of the day and serve as sort of a check, as a fourth of state. And whenever they do stuff like this, like, Mr. Obama, why did you choose to do this and that? And they start doing an emotional story that we would hope to read in Vogue magazine, nobody is doing their job. I saw I think it was an interview with it was the press conference with the White House spokesman. It wasn't Jay Carney, it was just a deputy that they put up there to be grilled. But his quote that he had is, the President of the United States is elected to protect the national security interest of the United States. And I just heard this clip, and it just made me wonder, I think everyone in the country has lost their sense to read. I don't think the term national security interest ever appears at all in the Constitution, yet somehow we've allowed, in this present day and age, in the year 2013, to give this one person so much power that he can decide to go bomb another country just like that. It's sickening.
I don't know what to say. Yeah, I mean, you're right.
You're right. So I have an article on the UK Parliament rejecting the Syrian action in the show notes at libertyinexile.com. You can listen to that. We are broadcasting on the Liberty Radio Network and the No Agenda stream. And as a reminder, we shall have this update on the podcast in the iTunes store, so you can follow it there. Other articles, there was a great article by my favorite journalist in the UK, Robert Fisk. This is at The Independent. He has an article basically saying, Mr. President, do you know that Al-Qaeda is fighting on the same side as you? And he has a very interesting take on this and spells it out pretty easily, why this is a bad idea, and the precedent this sets for wars or interventions going forward. So again, there's just so much going on right now, and there are some critical voices which are allowed to float to the surface. But then you have jerks like John McCain, who I've interviewed about military-industrial complexes and the role of congressional members in the past, and he's the #1 war cheerleader. Sir Redfield, any thoughts on that?
John McCain is just at least he's consistent on the warmongering. At least we can applaud him for his warmongering consistency.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, at the end of the day, it's hard to pin down exactly who he's working for. Does he have like a huge escrow bank account being built up by, I don't know, Lockheed Martin or BAE Systems, or, there's something going on. This guy cannot just be for killing everybody in the world. No way. That's not a reasonable policy that you can be elected on. But I guess, hey, people of Arizona, you elected this guy, that's what you get. Another interesting stuff, I guess if I can tie it to here in Europe, Germany has said they will not be going to Syria. France is pretty much leading towards a yes. And in Austria, which is one of the only neutral countries in Europe, all the political parties came together and said, no way, none of our money, whether it be through our own parliament or through the European Union, shall go to fund this war. So at least there are some countries doing the right thing, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
And there will be, a few of those articles linked in the show notes. It's as if it's another routine. I remember being at this microphone. Actually, I was sitting in the same place here in Vienna, Austria, 2 years ago, talking about Libya. And I guess if you want a comparison, it's the same thing. You have this supposed terrible leader that all these Western guys have dined with, and they've hung out with him and taken pictures and shaken his hand and been all friendly, and then he does one wrong thing, or for some reason the oil pipelines just happen to fall in the way of that country, and then he's a horrible dictator slaughtering his own people, and we have to go bomb people in order to stop him from killing people.
Yeah. Another thing is, where is the left again? They're not showing very much, especially in comparison to how they were with Iraq and when Bush was in power. And this is still, I feel kind of bad continue going after this point about hypocrisy and consistency, but the media is well known to have quote liberal bias or something like that. But where is the left? Where is the outcry? And I'm interested actually in perhaps looking at a study of rhetoric and whether, see, in Syria, this issue is the story that's being sold, the narrative that's being sold is people are being killed by their dictator or killed by a dictator-like figure and with chemical weapons, so we have to go and save these people. And for example, in the war in Iraq, we were sold into going into it because of weapons of mass destruction. So on one hand, you have a president coming from the right who is appealing to American safety or Israeli safety, basically a safety type of thing. And now we have a president on the left who is going after this, who's telling a story about compassion and about saving the people who are there. And I think that those are reflective of the positions of left and right, and that perhaps if we did a more in-depth study, we could find that the way that war is sold is consistent or consistently comes about in a way that's consistent with the party who's in power.
I don't even know if the war is being sold that well. I've stated on this program here recently that I really don't think that Obama really has any power himself. I think he's being pushed by either his advisors or huge donors this guy is probably the coolest cat in the world. He just happens to be in the worst job in the world, and he's forced to go out and give speeches and do all these interviews about stuff that he probably doesn't at all believe in. And I'm pretty much assuming that's why he's so bad at making a case for bombing Libya or bombing Syria or intervening in this country or that. I think he's just a spokesman who has sort of lost his charm. But a lot of people are still very busy fighting the war on women, Chris. Don't you know that? So therefore, it's seen as important to protect the president and defend the president and sort of allow other things to happen so that they can still have the D versus R game that favors their side.
I think I know what you're saying, but at the same to push my point a little bit more, just because he's a spokesman doesn't mean that I'm not necessarily saying that everything that Obama does is coming from Obama. I'm just saying that given the political atmosphere and given that it is a Democratic president, it would make sense to play up this narrative of compassion in order to be able to dodge criticism from the left.
So you're giving him, you're basically giving him free advice now, right?
Well, I suppose, but I think a popular notion of the war right now, the populist notion, is at least that the United States is going to intervene in order to save the people from the head of state.
Much like Libya.
Yes.
Okay, no, I agree with your point. I think that's exactly what's being played, and I think the number one place that you want to look if you actually want to know why a country goes to war, you have to look at the spokespeople who are at the State Department or the Defense Department or the White House, and sort of the things that they say and the reasons that they formulate. That's really it. All this other stuff that they throw in there about chemical attacks and all this, they're useful. They're useful rhetorically as sort of tools that you put out there and saying, well, we set this bar, and we said that if the rebels crossed this bar or the government crossed this bar, then we would send in aid for the rebels. it's very useful. And when you create that, it makes it very easy for a president or secretary of state to justify intervening and killing more people. And even if you watch the press conference with John Kerry, what he gives as his reason for why we should intervene, we being the U.S. government, is that he saw the YouTube videos and they were really bad. And this is evidence that the Syrian regime is very bad. So if everybody goes on YouTube and watches it, they'll see how bad they are.
Wow, that's disturbing in itself. That the Secretary of State would say something like that, especially considering that is what I hear when I talk to homeless people who are at Occupy movements, who just say, just go on the internet. It's all on the internet. You'll learn everything from there.
And again, people don't know that the internet is not this neutral ground where, again, objective information exists. Most people, usually most of the time, are stuck in a whirlwind of, I guess I'm using your term here, of confirmation bias. They research everything online, but because Google and the algorithms, the way it works, they get the information that they already know is true. It's just confirmed to them again and again. And this is in the Facebook algorithm. All your friends are posting about things that you're interested in. I mean, it's all a scam, and it's all really used as a way to control your mind, not necessarily by a central entity, but damn, is it working well.
Yeah, you're talking about the filter bubble, and there's a great TED Talk on that if anyone is interested. Just type in filter bubble, and you'll see that you are probably subject to it as well.
Yeah, it's Eli, what's his name? Eli Pariser. Beware the online filter bubbles. I'll put that in the show notes at libertyandexile.com. It's a really good video.
Awesome.
So, Token Capitalist, what other stuff you got for us here?
Well, do you want to start talking about my article?
Sure.
Well, all right, let's go for it. First, I wanted to preface it with the idea that this is kind of it's a rhetorical type of article. It's meant to temper the hostility towards capitalism in the feminist community. I myself consider myself to be a feminist. So this isn't coming from an anti-feminist point of view, although many feminists are anti-capitalist, but I don't think that these two things are necessarily
exclusive.
What's that?
Mutually exclusive.
Right. They're not mutually exclusive. They're not necessarily in conflict with one another. So the idea of this work is that birth rates and death rates in pre-industrial society, birth rates and death rates in a kind of roundabout way end up determining standards of living for that particular society. So when birth rates are exceeding death rates, you're going to have a lower quality of life, and when death rates are exceeding birth rates, you're going to have a higher quality of life. So these earlier societies, whether they exactly figured this out, like with that type of terminology, is probably not the case, but they figured out that their quality of life was dependent on the population size and population growth. So they did things to enact a way of they tried to control population. And one of the ways that they controlled population was through birth rate control. And they could have gone birth rate control, they could have gone death rate control. Death rate control is a little bit more grim, if you will, because that would include people, like the society killing people or exiling people, which they did.
Eugenics, right?
Eugenics in pre-industrial society, I suppose. But I mean, there was exposure. Babies were exposed into that's the practice of the baby being brought out into the wild, away from the city or the town or society, and then just allowing nature to take its course. This is kind of what happened to Moses in the Bible. I think this is an example of being exposed. But so there was death rate control somewhat, but the main way that populations were controlled was through birth rate control. And this was something that emerged, and males and females were both subject to norms and customs which controlled their sexual behavior, and it controlled their pairing. So basically the idea is that in pre-industrial society, norms and customs emerged in order to control men and women, but there's a large control put on women.
So that's more as a way to control the population and not just the number of population, but sort of the types of people that are produced? Is that what you're saying?
Not exactly. It's more about keeping the population on a steady pace of growth, as opposed to like a exponential.
So this is like in China, for example, today.
Yes. So anyway, throughout history, or throughout pre-industrial history, we have a steady rate of population increase, and we also have a steady rate of technological increase, or technological innovation. The rate at which innovation happens allows for populations to grow. So if innovation were to happen very quickly, it would be possible for the population to grow quickly also without having too much diminishing returns to land, too much diminishing returns to resources. This is getting complex. I recommend that you read the article. It's better than what I'm doing right now. But the main point is that when the Industrial Revolution happened, the rate of technological increase increased at such a rate that population control through these norms, customs, misogyny, patriarchy, the rate of technological increase increased at such a rate that these constraints on population, although they were embedded in our culture, were no longer necessary. And so this is a possibilities-based explanation for why feminism was not only possible, or was not only desirable, but also possible. It couldn't have happened without the need to restrict population.
Okay. All right. Well, for those who are interested, it will be at the show notes at libertyandexile.com, and your website again there, Sir Redfield, is thetokencapitalist.wordpress.com. So if they want the in-depth take and your own thesis that you formulated here, that's the place to go.
I appreciate it. Was that clear? Do you want to ask me any questions on that? Because I feel like I was kind of not the clearest explanation.
No, obviously it's a very academic argument, but you're really looking at sort of something that goes way beyond my own pay grade. So I shall leave it at that. As far as why populations expand and the reasons that we don't need to control how populations grow anymore, I think is an interesting argument, and obviously I can't make it. But that's why we rely on people like you, the token capitalist, to go deep into it.
All right, I appreciate that. If you want to ask me any questions on it, go ahead and throw up a comment on it, or send me an email, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you have on it.
Good man. Now, another field of expertise that you have is the minimum wage. Now, not because you're on the minimum wage, but because you studied it, you know the effects of raising or hiking the minimum wage, and you yourself had a great anecdote before that you shared with me about people who are protesting for a higher minimum wage in fast food restaurants. So what's going on here? What's the background of this story?
Well, the anecdote that I shared is that there are some protests going on outside of fast food restaurants around the nation, and
The U.S. Yes.
in the U.S. And in addition to these demonstrations and these rallies and these protests, the participants are going into the fast food restaurants and attempting persuasion at the workers themselves to join the rallies and to join the protests and to join the demonstrations and to basically to strike. They are persuading the workers to leave their job, leave their duties, and allow for.
Well, they're attempting to persuade them, right?
Right. It's an attempt. They're attempting to persuade them, and just one example that I have is there's an episode where the workers were told that their manager would fire them had they participated in the rallies. And to me, I just felt an immediate pang of compassion, and I felt very, very, very bad for these fast food workers who are in a obviously difficult situation, but also that these white middle class college students are coming from the shadows of the ivory tower and going to the locations of these restaurants, and at no risk to themselves are trying to persuade people to do things that are very risky for them. That is their livelihood. If they lose that, it's gonna cause serious harm. And I don't know that those college students that I'm talking about are going to be able to have the resources to put them up or to pay their rent for a number of months until they are able to find another job. It's just a bad situation, and the idea that it really is these ivory tower academics who are causing the college students to go out there and possibly cause harm to these fast food workers, even though it's in the name of benefiting them. It's very unfortunate, and it's cruel, and it's wanton.
I think a lot of people are calling for something like a $15 minimum wage, which is egregious. If you were to do that tomorrow, you're talking about huge sorts of inflation, but we won't get too much in the technical details. But I just wanted to share a story of myself. I was traveling recently, and in Lausanne, Switzerland, they only have maybe 2 or 3 people working the registers at a place like McDonald's. And instead of hiring more workers, what they have is about 10 different machines where you can place your orders. Now, the machines are not too difficult to work. It comes in a multitude of different languages if people are interested. And you can order right there. Your food comes just as quickly, and your service just as much, and you don't need a human being.
What was the restaurant?
McDonald's.
Oh yes, I saw there. You actually went to it. I saw an article about they're doing a couple of test places of that.
Well, no, they had that in Lausanne, Switzerland, and I've seen them here in Vienna, and I think I saw some in Germany as well. I mean, this is something that's sort of already out there, and when a fast food chain is being required to pay workers $15 an hour, just to take the U.S. example, well, that necessarily means that all the prices of the fast food will have to go up. Therefore, it really won't even be fast food anymore. It'll just be really expensive, crappy food. And there's plenty of that. There's plenty of that already. We don't need more.
Right.
Again, this is just another instance. And there are some really good articles of people who can, I guess, argue this down a lot better than I can. But I think this goes to the arguments of Bastiat and Henry Hazlitt that as soon as you attempt to help one group of people, you put another group of people into a worse situation. And in this case, yes, you might be giving the workers a higher pay for a little while, but then more and more people are probably going to stop going to these fast food chains because they're not as cheap. And all the people who rely on McDonald's and these other places to get their food because they don't have enough money to pay for a 3-course dinner, well, they're running low on options and they're going to have to go elsewhere. And it's just a spiral, and it never ends. And of course, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
You're absolutely right. And I think one of the important lessons to it's kind of fundamental. It's fundamental. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch, and you can't raise the minimum wage without it costing somewhere else in the economy. And
But Chris Redfield, aren't these workers being exploited?
I'm willing to concede this exploitation point, because I'm not really interested in the language and this inflammatory rhetoric very much. But we can postulate that they are being exploited, and the point is that they are still better off than free people who were quote not just in places that attempted utopianism, like the Soviet Union or like North Korea, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea today.
People's Republic. Is it the Democratic People's Republic? Hold on, I gotta look that up.
No, I can guarantee you that it is.
I can guarantee you.
Also, can you look up the USSR, what the USSR stood for? That's escaping me right now. But
United Soviets. I don't know. Hold on.
Places that attempted utopia and utopianism.
Oh, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
Yes, the places like that attempted this utopian vision. The people there were and are much worse off than places that attempted a pragmatic approach to things. And I consider the group of countries that were pragmatic to be capitalist countries. And even though not everyone is in the best of circumstances, that the system and the workers there, to some reasonable extent, are doing okay. And we see these stats put out by the right about how poor people in the United States have 2 TVs, cell phones, air conditioning, washer dryers, dishwashing machines, all of these modern conveniences and really signs of wealth and signs of a modern society, signs of modern living. And that, even though it comes from perhaps maybe a kind of a cruel source, I think that the point stands is that the living conditions of even the poor in capitalist countries are better off than the poor in like these places that preach utopia.
Yeah, and it always comes down to what can you do to try to help people who are in a bad position. And a lot of people might say, well, I'll give that guy an opportunity. Perhaps I'll link him up with somebody I know. Maybe we can offer him a job. Other people say, well, it's the government's duties, the government's role, meaning we need to use collective force and somehow give this guy money, or we need to change business so that it is more open to hiring him. I mean, there's just different ways to go about it. And I think for people who would like to at least advocate some sort of stable, peaceful society, you really just have to take the path that uses the least amount of coercion and force as possible. Now, that's my own opinion. It probably might not be shared by a majority, but I think at least the first part of our scenario here, the first example where you attempt to help somebody, I think that goes a little better. I'll just give a small little example of my own. I used to work with a fellow at a restaurant in North Carolina, and he was a cook, and he lost his job, unfortunately. And he came to me, and he was just talking about his situation, and I decided I'd do something for him. I'd call up my former employer, and I'd recommend him. I helped him with his application. I helped him with his CV. And guess what? He got a job, and he was able to pay for his daughter, pay for his cell phone bill, and to pay his rent. I did not ask the government to force the old employer to change their policy and rehire him, or ask the government to give him money. I did what I thought I would appreciate someone doing for me in that same situation.
I think that's the best you can do. I think that's the best you can do. Yeah, and I wanted to say one more thing about this minimum wage thing. Jason Brennan in the Bleeding Heart Libertarians blog makes the argument that this idea of government price control and basically price manipulation is bad for one reason, because right it distorts it distorts prices. It's a price distortion that filters through the rest of the economy, and it makes distortions elsewhere as well. Right, that's the Austrian approach. But at the same time, it's really this call for a minimum wage is a attempt at society, and I think leftists, to outsource moral obligations. Right, so the left believes that there's a moral obligation that people have some kind of minimum standard of living in a social safety net. Hayek thought this. Milton Friedman, to some extent, thought this as well with his advocacy of the negative income tax. To the extent that I'm willing to buy this argument, which I am, Brennan makes the case that the left and society in general is trying to outsource moral obligations onto employers, or outsource society's moral obligation onto employers. So he's saying that whatever a worker's marginal revenue product is, employers can pay them the going rate, and it's incumbent upon society to kind of pick up the slack, kind of in like this way that the left and others, libertarians included, criticize the system that kind of happens at Walmart, how this very large percentage of Walmart's employees are receiving a vast amount of government assistance in some way, and where like the idea is that government is subsidizing Walmart. Well, that is true to some extent, but in that way, prices are not being distorted as much as they would be with minimum wage.
No, in a way, and I think that argument always goes to it's sort of this angle of saying, well, Walmart pays its workers so poorly that the government has to go in and start paying for the rest of everyone's health insurance, or you got to pay for food stamps, when it's really the other way around. It's because the dollar is so devalued now that let's say the price that these people or the wage that these people are getting just is not very high, and now because the price of everything else is going up, like food and healthcare, to have an ordinary job and attempt to pay for it is almost impossible. But that's not the fault of Walmart. Walmart is just an actor in the game, but the people manipulating the game are those that are printing the dollars and going to war and spending all this money and making it harder for everybody at home.
That's true. That's a great point as well. Walmart is not acting in a vacuum. The workers are not acting in a vacuum. There is lots of other things at play, and the Federal Reserve is something that is a big player in that.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right. That's a great point.
So Chris Redfield, we talked about Syria. We've talked a little bit about capitalism, feminism, and the Malthusian ideals. We've talked a little bit about the minimum wage and McDonald's. What other topics are, I guess, floating across your own news feeds or your own social networks, or things that are of interest to you that have sort of popped up recently? Because I have a couple. I think I shall yield the floor to you, however, because you are a guest here on Liberty in Exile. So anything you would like to throw our way?
I appreciate that. I think I'll just maybe a small plug for the organic, emergent protests that are kind of happening this Friday and this weekend about Syria. There are a number of protests happening, at least in my neck of the woods.
Oh, really?
So I encourage listeners to go and check out to see if there are any protests in your area, or if you want to organize one yourself. I think that it's something that
is that going on Facebook? People putting together events, or is this kind of spontaneous? Or
yes, it's people spontaneously putting Facebook events up for locations and times.
So is it like protest U.S. imperialism or protect Syria, or how's it mostly being framed?
All the ones that I've seen have been an anti-intervention, have come from an anti-intervention angle.
Cool. I dig that.
I think that Iraq is very fresh in our minds.
Yeah, and it's sad that it only has to be Iraq, because most of the wars that have occurred in the last 200 years have been pretty unjustified in a sense, and mostly started by lies that have been started by people in government. And that's the unfortunate fact of history, and it is happening once more. There's some of the articles I'm reading now that, as we know, the chemical weapons that were apparently used, that was the red line. Well, the first time they were used is by these rebels that the Western powers have been backing for the last few months. And just to remind listeners, and thankfully this was actually, I guess, either declassified or noted in an article, the entire reason that anything happened in Benghazi on September the 11th of last year, and the ambassador was killed, was because the CIA, as we well know, was trying to get the weapons that they brought into Libya to help defeat Gaddafi, and trying to get them up to Syria to hand to the rebels. And that was declassified, and it was put in articles, and people were openly writing about it. That's something that I talked about on this show about a year ago, so I'm glad to see that finally coming out. More of the, I guess, behind-the-scenes action of the CIA and pipelines and things that are way above our heads. If I can make one thing, though, I do have the Liberty in Exile book club that I've had up on the website for a while. I'd like to add a book to that. The book is by a German author. His name is Lutz Klavemann, and the book is called The New Great Game: Blood and Oil in Central Asia. He goes to all of these countries in Central Asia where all these pipelines and oil fields are being built, and really talks and foresees all the wars that have really happened in the last 10 years. The book is probably around 10 years old, but still it really does a great job of painting a picture of what's truly going on. So I recommend that to listeners, and you can find that on libertyinexile.com on the book club section.
So how accurate would you say he was in a percentage terms? How accurate would you say he was?
No, he's very accurate. He goes to different parts of China. He goes to Iraq and Afghanistan, and he goes to Iran, and goes to all these different places and talks about where the conflict is, and even has a line in there about Syria and how they're trying to build the Arab gas pipeline, and there's still a lot of negotiations going on, and they're really trying to figure out a way to get the Syrians on board, but it's not working. So then there are rumors about it, some sort of rebel movement, and this book was written in 2003.
Wow.
So there's a lot going on there. Yeah, that's a very good book. Now I'm reading one called, it's a French book by Eric Laurent about everything that happened with the banking so-called collapse in around September 2008. It's a very interesting book with a lot of insider knowledge and quotes. And Sir Chris, are you reading any good books at the moment, or anything of note?
I'm just trying to finish up Camille Paglia's Sexual Personae. I'm dabbling in a little Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice.
Getting in touch with your feminine side, I see.
What else am I checking out? I'm following Matt Taibbi's blog and his work in Rolling Stone, of course.
Has he written anything good lately? I haven't really seen him. I've been kind of traveling.
He has a recent article on the student loan bubble, basically, and how the government is making money off of
student loans, right?
Student loans, yep.
Ah, what a scam. Okay, we're learning.
What's that?
No, we're learning. It's interesting to see that, especially if he writes about it. And he is pretty talented, and I wouldn't say that he's necessarily influential, but smart people read his stuff, and I think he understands what's going on.
I think so, too.
Yeah, that's good. It's kind of sad that there is no Michael Hastings to be around anymore. There's a lot of reporting going on about that, but it's only happening really on one website that I would recommend. It's whowhatwhy.com. That's run by investigative journalist Russ Baker, who wrote a very good book that's also in the Liberty in Exile book club called Family is Secrets, all about George Bush and the family, and he has a very, very interesting chapter on how Bob Woodward, whom we know from taking down President Nixon, was actually an agent and pawn of the CIA, and he has a lot of documents to back that up and to prove it, and it really changes your mind and changes the entire narrative of what happened during those years. So I recommend that book and all the reporting about Michael Hastings on whowhatwhy.com.
Can you, do you want to, I'm familiar with the Michael Hastings incident, but I think that we would be remiss if we didn't give a quick summary of what happened there.
Sure. So Michael Hastings was a reporter originally for Rolling Stone. He wrote a very critical article featuring Stanley McChrystal, who was head of the forces, I believe, in Afghanistan. That promptly led to him being fired, him being Stanley McChrystal. And Michael Hastings was sort of a national security reporter, and he was hired in the last year, I believe, by BuzzFeed, a growing site, and he was doing a little bit of investigative work on the CIA, huge complex, and a little bit about the NSA, and he was doing stories on John Brennan of the FBI, and doing a lot of interesting stories, again, on the national security complex. And what happened one unfortunate evening is he had a rental Mercedes, and he was driving along on the road, and apparently, according to witnesses at the scene, he was driving very, very fast and gunned it and hit a tree head-on and died immediately. His car proceeded to explode, and he was killed immediately in the blast. And there's a lot of great reporting by Who, What, Why, talking to local neighbors, people, I guess his wife put out some comments saying that this is very fishy. And there has actually been a lot as well reported about how the medical examiner for the body has been fired or been pressured. And there's a lot of stuff going on here, so it's sad to see a very good journalist, someone who is a very well-celebrated investigative journalist, who lost his life, unfortunately.
And are you buying any of the conspiracy theories?
Well, I mean, I don't know. There's not enough evidence 100% to say this happened or that. I think it's unfortunate. And it's also a very startling coincidence that he was writing articles about very powerful people, and that could have popped the bubble that is power and rhetoric around them. So I don't know necessarily where I fall, but hopefully we'll have some more information, at least in the coming months. Who knows?
Gotcha.
That's the way it goes. Well, Sir Chris Redfield, it's been a pleasure to talk to you on this episode of Liberty in Exile. I will point the people over to your website, thetokencapitalist.wordpress.com. Anything you'd like to say in the closing remarks, my good friend?
Oh, only that it's been a pleasure.
As always, very fun to have you on. To the listeners, you can go to libertyinexile.com and check out the show notes, everything we talked about, the articles, and the links. And we'll be back to you next week. Once again, I am your host, Yael Osofsky, on the Liberty Radio Network and the No Agenda stream, saying au revoir et bonne chance à tous.
Visit libertyinexile.com.